Arnie, how did you get into the toy industry?
Well, Steve, there wasn't really a master plan. I got a job while I was in high school. And my first job was at a company called Chemical Sundries, later known as ChemToy. And in those days, in the late 60s, they sold soap bubbles in glass jars that retailed for a dime. And the job that I got was taking the bus to downtown Los Angeles and unloading boxcars of empty glass jars that came in from Anchor Hocking in Illinois. And that was my first job in the business.
You grew up here in LA?
I'm from LA, born here and until I left to go to Utah.
Utah, for sure. Did you go to college?
I did. I went to LA City College, and then I got drafted into the toy business big time.
I like that. Okay, so you started in high school.
Yeah.
Where did your career go from that first experience and until?
Well, my brother-in-law at the time was a rep here in Southern California, Fred Court, and I went to work for him. And in 1968 or 69, a friend of ours brought an item to us that was made in Japan. It was a small Super Ball. And we looked at it and said, we could probably sell these. And they retailed for 10 cents. And that was the founding of Imperial Toy in 1969.
And how big was Imperial when you were there?
Well, we grew it from that one item we sold at a dime to when I sold out, the company was doing close to $50 million.
And Imperial's really known for a lot of seasonal bubble business, right?
Right.
Did you fall in love with bubbles? What happened?
Well, I've always thought that bubbles were one of the greatest toys in the industry. You never see a kid who gets bored playing with bubbles, and it's simple and it's easy, and they're amazed by them, watching them float. The colors. So I've always thought it's a great product line in the industry.
I think you'll be proud to know that it's my favorite toy as well.
Well, it's good to hear.
Yeah, you can ask anybody in the toy industry, they feel like my passion level, my excitement for new bubble toys is always at the highest of anything else.
Well, it's real play. It's not looking at a screen. And whether it's a 2-year-old who's amazed by watching bubbles float in the air, or somebody celebrating at a wedding, bubbles are still a really cool thing to experience.
Absolutely. So at dinner last night, you talked about the mind of a 3-year-old.
Right.
And this idea of just getting into it to really understand play at its core. Can you talk a little bit more?
Well, I believe in order to be successful in this industry, you really have to get into the mind of a 3-year-old and understand the way they play. There are no parameters. They can take a Tonka truck and fill it with Star Wars characters and think that's really cool. Their imagination runs wild, and you have to understand the way they play with toys for a toy to be really successful. At least that's what worked for us.
Can you tell us what some of Funrise's biggest success stories are?
Well, we had a number of them, but when we got into the light and sound business, sometime I guess in the early 90s, and we introduced putting a sound chip and lights into toy vehicles, that's where the company really exploded. And then we were fortunate enough to make a deal with Hasbro and do the Tonka deal, which we kept the license going for over 20 years.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more, because that was a really revolutionary deal in the industry. A competitor licensing a property from another competitor. Can you speak more to that, please?
Well, the reality was Hasbro was very, very preoccupied with the Star Wars license. They'd acquired Tonka, which was such a classic brand, and hadn't spent a lot of time on developing and bringing new product to market. And we were in the vehicle business with our City Force light and sound, and one of our major retailers called us up and said, you ought to talk to Alan Hassenfeld, because they're really not doing a lot with Tonka, and if you took that brand and married them with your product line, we think it would be a home run. And we did, and they agreed, and the rest is history. A 20-year relationship where we did an incredible amount of business with the Tonka brand.
Yeah, I think it's a monumental shift. we're exploring licensing and how important it is to the toy industry as a whole.
Right.
What are some of the advantages and maybe disadvantages of licensing a product?
Well, there are more advantages than disadvantages. What licensing does is creates a degree of exclusivity in product lines. Unfortunately, today, a lot of products are being private labeled by retailers. So if you have a license, if you have Frozen, they can't private label your Frozen product. Yeah. And it gives you, it distinguishes you from the pack if you have a good license.
Arnie, you're known for treating your employees amazingly. You're known for treating your buyers amazingly. What led you on this path that put culture and people above anything else?
Well, you know, it was always my goal to run a very professional business. And I always felt that if you treat your buyers with respect, and if they could trust you, the business would build on that. And I always knew you can't do it by yourself. If you don't have a good team with you, you know, you can't work 24/7. You need people you can trust. And we started out with that philosophy in mind when I started the company. And when Shirley Price came on as my first employee, we continued with that philosophy of treating people right, wanting people to stay. I always felt that turnover was a disaster in any business, because just when somebody became valuable and you lost them, you had to start all over again. So that was the philosophy of the business, and from the time I started to the time I left, that's the way we treated our people.
Arnie, I've heard you have a lot of Arnie-isms, different terms that you've been heard using in various situations.
Sure.
Could you give us a few that?
Well, you know, it's just some things that come to mind, and you don't think of them ahead of time, and then all of a sudden you get a good laugh and said, "Oh, that worked pretty well." It's just, you know, silly little things that would get a laugh out of my team, or a laugh out of a buyer,
yeah.
And you know, sometimes that just broke the ice without going into any specifics.
Yeah, I heard there's some Yiddish, English combinations.
Well, you know,
there.
yeah, we try to put things together. I think that our team all learned a little Yiddish by the time they were done at Funrise.
So the company you founded here in Funrise, you founded Funrise here in Los Angeles.
That's right.
What were some of the advantages and disadvantages of being a company here?
Well, in the early days, Los Angeles was the home of some of the biggest toy distributors in the United States. We had Federal Wholesale and Blatt Distributing and Pensick and Gordon, and up in the Bay Area, American Toy. So being on the West Coast gave us an advantage to sell those big distributors. Also, since we were doing the lion's share of our manufacture overseas, it was an easy trip to Hong Kong or China or Japan from Los Angeles. So those were some of the advantages. And then as time went on, as we know, this is the heart of all the entertainment business and studios. So the relationships there were really important and easier if we were located here on the West Coast.
Do you think play, like you're a big kid at heart, what industries do you see a lot of the same kind of mojo or play energy that we
Well, first of all, play is inherent in kids. And you see these film clips of kids in Afghanistan or in Iraq, in bombed out neighborhoods, still playing with the soccer ball. And they're not told to play, it's something that just happens. You don't train kids to play, it's inherent in their lives. And being a kid and wanting to play is just a normal part of growing up. So that's the way I see play. It's something that we add the tools that they play with. But if you had no toys, the kids are going to play with a cardboard box and whatever they have around them, they will create in their own fantasy and imagination to play with.
Arnie, what does kid at heart mean to you?
Well, I think it's important to be a kid at heart to be in this business. If you don't feel and the joy of a child, you really can't be in this toy business and be successful. There was nothing more fun than to watch when we would hand Tonka trucks to a kid in a sand pit, and watched, he never told them how to play and how the kids would just thrive and enjoy and fantasize and build roads and get dirty. I think one of the greatest things we had at Tonka is getting dirty since 1947.
Yeah, we're an iconic brand.
It's a great brand.
Minnesota, right?
Pardon?
Minnetonka, Minnesota? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's where it came from. They were founded in Minnesota, and Lake Minnetonka was there, so that was, I think, the where the brand came from.
Yeah. Arnie, to tie it back to Ryan, can you tell us what Ryan was like when you hired him?
Well, Ryan was a bit green. We'd had some experience working with Ryan when he was with the OKeefe company in Minnesota, and we were looking for a national sales coordinator manager at the time. And I believe we put the word out with all of our sales reps if they knew someone who might be right for the job. And Ryan applied, and we flew him out to LA to meet the team, and he seemed like he could do it, and we made a decision quick and brought him on board. And he grew into the job. I remember Ryan asking me right in the very beginning, will I have the ability to make decisions? And I do believe I told him, you can make any decision you feel comfortable making. And that's the way I treated a lot of our folks. I couldn't be there. If I had to make every decision, I didn't need them working for me. And Ryan did a great job for us. A bit of it learning as we went, as we all do. And that's how Ryan came, I guess, with the 90s.
Yeah. It's been a long, I met Ryan, of course, a little bit earlier than I met you.
Right.
But I quickly followed in Ryan's footsteps and worked as a receptionist at Funrise at 16. Do you remember when we met and me getting you coffee or doing the?
I do remember when Ryan said that he was a Catholic big brother to a nice Jewish kid from the Ukraine.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
I do remember that.
I was influenced and ultimately mentored by you, maybe indirectly at Funrise, but the culture that you set, and it's everything that I am today, the giving back and helping and collaborating, right, with other people, because that's what Funrise taught us, the values. Nothing had a bigger impact though on me than the toy drive that we did.
Sure.
Could you tell us about the toy drive and how you started that?
Well, you try to give back, and I was a fan of riding motorcycles, and I thought it would really be cool if a bunch of my friends who rode motorcycles brought toys to Children's Hospital. And that grew to an enormous event that we did, I think it was the first Sunday in December for 10 or 15 years. At one point we had 1,000 riders and brought thousands and thousands of toys into to the sickest kids at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. I do remember very, very vividly going in with some of the people from the Toy Industry Association and some of the local city council members into the pediatric oncology ward. And these were kids who were really sick and in the hospital for a long time. And the joy we brought them, bringing a toy to them at Christmas, brought tears to these guys who were all burly and had a bandana on, and you could see the tears flowing under their sunglasses about the joy we were bringing to these kids. In some cases, these kids had been in the hospital for months, and people stopped visiting them. And their parents were sitting there, and we would come into that hospital on that Sunday with buckets full of toys, baskets full of toys, and it was incredible to see the joy that we brought.
Arnie, we heard that there was a natural disaster that affected your business for a little bit. Can you tell us about this?
Well, that's one of the challenges of being on the West Coast. I think it was 1994. I was in Hong Kong, and the phones started ringing that there was a massive earthquake in Los Angeles. Well, I flew back to LA and found out that the building we were in had basically collapsed. The walls had moved out and the sprinkler system had gone, and my God, did we have a mess. So we had to meet the challenge, and you couldn't find additional warehouse space because everybody in the San Fernando Valley was looking for temporary space. So we innovated, and we put up a circus tent in the parking lot. and we ran our warehouse and shipping department for 6 or 8 months out of a tent. And yeah, that was our bout with a natural disaster.
Arnie, final question. Any advice for the future kid at heart or the kid at heart who's looking to enter the toy industry?
Well, innovation's wonderful, but don't overthink things. Remember, your ultimate consumer is probably between 3 and 5 years old. And sometimes you can overthink the product lines to the point where you make them more complex than they need to be. You're still selling to a very, very young consumer. And one of my stories, we did a great product line at one time called Sassy Stables. And it was a horse that recognized the saddle, and it would speak, and it would move. And one of the things we had was great hair and a brush. And we found out that all the little girls wanted to do was brush the hair. They didn't care about the technology, and it would have probably been a much greater product had we not overthought it.